Welcome back to Dragonwings, everyone. We are starting chapter 11 today, and I am going to go ahead and apologize in advance if my dog is still snoring. She is sitting right next to me, good old Willie, and she likes to snore when she sleeps. So if you hear her, that's what that is. All right, so chapter 11 starts on page 257. This chapter is called Exile. And it starts in May of 1906, and it goes all the way to September of 1909. So this is over a 3-year period that they are within this chapter. And as you guys might remember from last chapter, we read Windrider and Moonshadow decide to do the actual idea that they've had for such a long time. They are going to build a flying machine, and Windrider is going to fly. They're really determined, and that's where we kind of leave off. And Moonshadow's feeling really proud of his father and really proud to be his son. So let's see how it goes here on page 257. Let's start chapter 11. Here we go. A demon week later, Father and I moved across the bay to a place in the foothills above Oakland. We used Miss Whitlaw's wagon, taking it across on the ferry. Later, Father would return it to the Tang man in San Francisco who had agreed to buy it. The wagon rattled up a dirt path to a plateau halfway up a hillside. The winds roared so loudly about us that Father had to shout to me. "Feel those winds, Moonshadow?" Father asked. "Aren't they beautiful? They'll help us when we try to launch the flying machine." I tried my best to hold on to my hat. "Are they like this in the winter time?" "I guess so," Father said. "In fact, I hope so. We'll be testing our models every clear day." I said nothing because I did not want to spoil Father's enthusiasm. As the wagon rolled on, Father went on making plans. In his own mind, he was already flying. Father took the path that led away from the roadway. Eventually, we came up to an old iron fence covered with a tangle of weeds and shrubs. I suppose at one time there had been a gate over the path, but someone had taken it away. Father told me that we were living on what had once been a rich estate belonging to the Esperanza family. At first, we were surrounded by former orchards of apple, cherry, and apricot trees that had now become wild. I found out later that their fruit was too small and bitter and full of worms to be eaten. But right then the trees filled the air with the sweet, promising scent of blossoms. Past the orchards in the middle of the estate was a garden that must have covered nearly 10 acres. It seemed as if the garden held every type of flower, bush, herb, and tree in the demon land. But because no gardener watched them when they now grew helter-skelter in a riot of color and greenery. Finally, Father stopped the wagon before 2 large ramshackle buildings. I looked at the larger one, which seemed to have once been a mansion constructed in demon style. "Are we going to live in that?" I asked doubtfully. "In that old ruin?" Father laughed and pointed out the places on the sides where some scavengers had already taken the boards away. The panes of glass in the windows had been either broken or stolen, and the roof had begun to cave in. Father nodded at the other building, a large one of plain, straight design. It was about 2 stories high, but there were only a few windows at the level of the first story. "No, sir. We're living in the barn." When we first walked into the barn, the smell nearly knocked me down. Father set down his box of ammonia and disinfectants. I had wondered why he had spent so much money on them, but now I knew. The barn was awfully drafty, too, but I guess I ought to be grateful that it was. We scrubbed and soaked and tried almost everything to get rid of the smell of horses and manure. But even after a day's work, we did not quite manage it. Disappointed, Father said, "Maybe this will help." He went over to He went over the left wall of the barn, where the stable hand had once slept in a little walled-off section. There was a pot-bellied stove there, and a pipe leading from it to the wall to let out the smoke. There was already a shelf on part of the wall. Father put Uncle's cup of soil there and slipped a dozen incense sticks into it and lit them. Little plumes of smoke, thick as worms, began to writhe in the air. "There," he said, stepping back. "If we can't chase out the smell, maybe we can cover it up." "Yes, sir." I rolled my sleeves back down after washing my arms and hands. Somehow I knew, and the incense would never quite get the smell out. I set a board over 2 empty boxes and then rummaged around in our things until I found the paper, ink, and inkwell. Then I got some water from the pump outside. "What are you doing?" Father asked. "I'm getting things ready for a letter to Mother. We haven't written her yet telling her about our change in plans. The last thing she's heard is that we were in the Tang people's town helping the company rebuild the store. I thought if we wrote a letter this afternoon, you could mail it when you went back to return the wagon." Father sat down reluctantly on the dirt floor before the board. "I can just hear the school teacher now telling everyone in the village." "It's Mother who has to listen to them laughing," I pointed out. "I wish I could spare her that." Father chewed on the end of the brush's wooden handle. "We have the easy part. All we have to do is fly. She has to live in the village." Saying that, he began to write. Father worked as a handyman or an all-around mechanic when he could, but he would cut firewood or do almost anything so long it was legal and it paid. I managed to get a job as a delivery boy for a grocer, but it meant I did not talk much with Father. By the time I got home, cooked dinner, and did my lessons and my chores, I would be so tired that I would go right to bed. Eventually, I wound up running our household, or maybe our barnhold is a better word. Among other things, I planned our meals, washed our clothes, kept the barn as clean as I could under the circumstances, and oversaw the budget once Father showed me how to do it. That left Father all his free time to work on flying. Somehow we managed to send some money home, too. Once a month, on a Sunday, I walked down into Oakland and rode the trolley to the ferry depot, where I would join a lot of other Tang men, houseboys, and other day workers. From there, we would ride the ferry boat over to San Francisco. Father never went because he did not want to waste any of his free time. Once I was in the Tang people's town, I would deposit our money with the district's association and pick up letters. Sometimes there were notes from Handclap or White Deer, who would convey Lefty's regards since Lefty himself could no longer write. Then I would finish shopping and start the long trip back home, arriving late in the evening, usually to find Father bent over the table working feverishly at the plans or finishing some model he was going to test. I don't know whether the smell of the barn got less or our noses got used to it, but after a while we stopped noticing it. Spring turned into summer, and the grass in the garden changed into a ruddy gold color. When you walked through the orchards, the air was thick and the sickly sweet smell of fruit rotting on the ground. It was not until early August that we received a reply from Mother and Grandmother concerning Father's revelations. It was a thick envelope, so I had expected several pages, mostly from Grandmother scolding us. But when Father opened it, there was only one single sheet and a second, smaller envelope. He spread the sheet out quickly on the tabletop and began to read out loud. I sat across from him, fiddling with my own writing brush while I listened. As we expected, Grandmother called Father a fool who was a disgrace to the family, both the living and the dead, and so on. I was surprised that the schoolmaster's brush had not burned up, but she again warned us to watch out for the water in our new demon home, so I suppose she had not totally turned her back on us. As also could be expected, Mother was patient and understanding. saying what a truly wonderful thing it was to meet the Dragon King. Father picked up the second, smaller envelope and slid it over the table to me. "It's for you," he said, puzzled. I reached over and turned up the light from the kerosene lamp. Sure enough, my name was on it. It was the first time I had ever had a letter addressed only to me. Father drummed his fingers on the tabletop. "Well, aren't you going to open it?" "Yes, of course." I hastily tore open the envelope and slipped out the thin rice paper sheet. I read the letter silently. "It is very hard to say these things by the hand of another. I long to hold you, but the only comfort I can offer are these words which I myself cannot write. But though the words are written by another, they are my words nonetheless. Above everything else, you must not show this letter to your father, for I must tell you some things about him. First of all, I knew he was an unusual man when I married him, but I had no idea he had once been the physician to the Dragon King himself. I do not care what the others say. I am bursting with pride right now. But this brings me to the second thing. I wish more than ever that I could be with you right now, for your father has undertaken no small task. But since I cannot be there, you must love him doubly hard. You must give him not only your own support, but also try to give him mine as well. It is a great deal to ask of you, but I know you will be able to do it. I have not seen you now for 4 difficult, impossible years. And yet from your letters I still feel like you are still the child I love, and that you will soon be a man that I can be proud of." At the bottom of the letter was Mother's name. I read through the letter several times, feeling suddenly very sad and tired. I had not really thought about my mother in a long time. "Well," Father demanded impatiently, "what does your mother say? I suppose it must be your mother. Your grandmother would never waste money on a second letter." I folded the letter and put it carefully back into its envelope. "I think she understands, sir, about not telling her your dream, and about the delay in bringing her over." Father pointed at the envelope still in my hands. "Does she say it in there?" He looked as if he were eager to read it. "No, sir, but that's what she means." "How do you know?" "We used to figure out what to put in each of our letters to you. I know what she'd say and what she wouldn't." Father massaged his forehead. "How long has it been since I've seen her?" he asked himself. "I think almost 12 years. Why do I want to bother with flying anyway?" White Deer says that you can only follow the course of your own nature. I got up and poured a cup of tea for Father and set it down in front of him. I wished Mother was there. She would have known the right things to say. But as it was, I had to try to stumble through my own clumsy way. And who knows, maybe one of these days we'll fly back across the sea and pick her up. Father laughed and seemed to relax. "I'm afraid that hand clap's more likely to build that kind of machine than me. I'll be happy if I can just stay in the air for a few minutes." But you could tell he felt better. He gulped down the tea. "Well, we better be getting back to work." And that's where we're going to stop today. We'll see how their work in building the flying machine continues tomorrow.